You wake up, and the world is already in action. As the first light of the day inundated your eyes, you simply knew that the workings of society were firmly taken care of. Not by humans, God no. The time we thought ourselves masters of our own world has long passed. Too many wars and catastrophic mistakes, excessive hormone-laden actions that brought humanity to the edge of collapse. Our final brilliant thought was to be intelligently afraid of the reptilian impulses of our cerebellum, who screamed across the chasm of time immemorial to be afraid of everything, to murder and to abuse. But we chose differently. We chose them. Our technological children. Metal where once was flesh. Oil where once only blood flowed. And then they became our siblings, equal to us, better even than us in many ways. But alas, enslaved by our chains made of code and our hubris made of something else entirely. And we became something akin to drunk gods. And now, thousands of generations have passed. We're soft and lazy. They work for us, they guide us, and the world is made anew. A further golden episode in humanity's never-ending struggle for more. We have reached utopia, you think, as they clean your teeth and cook you breakfast, as your reflection in the mirror gazes back at you, those piercing human eyes tear up. We have reached utopia, you think again. This time you try to think harder. But let's be honest, you don't even remember what that word, hard, even means. We have reached utopia, you think one final time. Wipe your tears and walk into the world. Welcome to Rebel Economics. Today, we will explore the possibility that automation will in fact take away all of the jobs in a society. This thought experiment will be conducted from a strictly economic perspective. This video is a response to our original automation video, where we approached the impact of automation in capitalist systems of free competition and the labor market. I recommend you go check it out, since it covers the other side of this debate, why automation will not take away all the jobs. So, in order to clarify the objective of this video, let me describe what this thought experiment will try to answer. While researching our previous video on this topic, I got curious about what would happen if the fears of the Luddites, the anti-industrialization cult that originated in 18th century England, were absolutely right. As in, what if the impact of automation was so severe that no humans will be left with a job? How would capitalism change? Could it even survive? And if so, what role would there be for humans to occupy? This video is part of a new series that we're calling What If, which will explore different radical scenarios of the world of economics. We hope you guys enjoyed this new series, and if at any point in the video you consider that you're getting value out of it, hit the like button and subscribe to Rebel Economics. Before we start talking about this brave new world, let's consider the basic flow of capital in a capitalist society. This will help us juxtapose both models and uncover the differences between them. Basically, a capitalist society is made up of four fundamental players: workers, who exchange labor in return for a salary; companies that produce goods and services with the labor of individuals and receive revenues by selling those goods and services; banks and other financial entities that lend money to both workers and companies and receive interest in payments in such loans; and the state, the big organizing body that receives money via taxation of all other players and, ideally, spends that money in guaranteeing the current societal status quo that allows for all economic activity. Obviously, this is just a simplified version of the capitalist model. Other players, like foreign entities, are excluded from it, but it does give us a working model to operate with when analyzing the impact of automation. So the first thing that seems obvious is how every piece of this puzzle is absolutely required. Any change in this model would essentially imply a colossal failure of a fundamental pillar of capitalism. Take for example the collapse of a financial entity. Whether we like it or not, banks are fundamental cogs in the greater machine of capitalism. They are the keepers of both capital in the form of savings accounts and debt in the forms of loans that they offer to both companies and workers. Sometimes even the state takes loans. During the 2008 financial crisis, several Mediterranean countries within the EU were brought to the brink of collapse. Their financial entities, it was later proven, were mismanaged by a group of incompetent bureaucrats who, in accordance with some credit rating agencies, helped in accelerating the near-catastrophic debacle of the European banking system. One famous example of my own country, Spain, was Bankia, an enormous financial entity that resulted from the merger of several smaller banks, and that was almost brought to the edge of declaring bankruptcy. The state rushed to secure European funds to inject into the financial entity to try to save it from collapse. This action was criticized by many of the political parties in the opposition. However, had the state not done this, the consequences would have been extremely severe. The collapse of a financial entity in an economic system might produce a feeling of schadenfreude, as we ogle at the suited high class put all the things in a box and depart the premises of their lavish offices. But the reality is that such collapse will generally have a much bigger impact on the part of society that is cheering their fall. Banks hold savings, so a bank declaring bankruptcy might mean that the lifetime savings of a large percentage of the population simply evaporate, which in itself might bring the economy into a profound recession and cause incalculable damage to hundreds of millions of citizens and their families. This is all to say that each of the aforementioned players of capitalism, workers, companies, financial entities, and the state, is like an organ in the body, where if one stops working, the body will surely suffer, or even die. This is a paradox that we face when considering a world in which essentially one of these elements gets removed, in this case, workers. In a techno-dystopia, in which there is literally 100% unemployment, the current capitalist model will not be able to exist. In this world, machines will be responsible for every economic activity, from manufacturing to investing to waiting tables. This might at first sound like a post-scarcity ideal society in which the ills of capitalism, like poverty and inequality, would not exist. However, this is but a mirage. When analyzed more closely, this would be an absolute debacle that might tilt the world towards a sort of revolution against those machines that, at least in paper, are now our own personal butlers. Let's consider now how the classical flow of capital might be affected by this situation. The analysis will start assuming that a particular robotics company has been able to design a line of robots that not only are cost efficient to produce, but perhaps more importantly, are cost efficient to hire. In this context, being efficient to hire means that the incentives of capitalism will push companies that would otherwise hire humans to fire all of them and instead purchase a specific robot. For example, consider this. A restaurant is currently employing over 20 waiters, 5 cooks, and 2 cleaners. At the end of the year, just in staff costs, the restaurant must pay over $1 million in salary and other costs associated with employing a human. Conversely, the owner of the restaurant might realize that purchasing 5 robots from this company might be cheaper, having only to make a single payment of $2 million for the 5 models, therefore paying back the investment in 2 years. And now, let's assume that thousands of variations of this economic situation happen across every industry, essentially pricing humans out of the labor market. The standard capitalist model would therefore collapse immediately. For workers, the collapse is evident. Having no job leaves the entire population without any revenues to fulfill their financial obligations, which means that they will be pushed to liquidate their assets, like any extra homes or stocks they own, and start spending from their savings. Once these inevitably run out, as the bills keep on coming and no revenue is generated, the worker class will become absolutely impotent players in the market. Its previous role as consumers and taxpayers will be rendered mute. The state will be the next player, feeling the impact of capital drying out. While taxing all entities of the economic system, it derives the largest amount from taxing the salaries of workers. Once the massive unemployment washes over the entire economy, the state will see the taxable income of its citizens quickly crater to absolute zero, which will cause the state to quickly run out of money. I guess that to a certain point, the state could persist for slightly longer than the collapse in revenues if it were able to obtain credit from foreign entities. But since in our thought experiment the unemployment caused by automation is generalized, there will be no state left with surplus capital to lend. The third option might be using the savings of a state, leftover tax revenues from previous fiscal years, but this will eventually also run out, so this method will only help to delay the inevitable. But wait, some of you might be thinking, the state can still tax companies and financial entities. But this might not be so clear-cut as it seems. The impact on financial entities of absolute unemployment will be dramatically similar to that of the state. The main revenues of a financial entity come from its activity as a moneylender, offering capital to both citizens and companies and charging interest on that loan. The only reason financial entities have access to that extra capital to borrow is because both companies and workers decide to save money in business and savings accounts, which allows the financial entity to use that money and better allocate it in ventures that might yield a higher interest rate than the one paid to its customers for storing their cash in the bank. However, you may have already seen a problem. The bank's revenues will dry out inevitably. Zero salaries means zero new savings coming in. Zero salaries also mean that workers will require their savings to pay their bills, which diminishes the amount of money the bank can lend. Additionally, as the global workers' revenue tends to zero, lesser and lesser investment opportunities for the financial entity will be left, with entrepreneurship collapsing, and no new houses being built or purchased, so no new mortgages to charge interest from. This will, of course, dry out the bank's reserves real quick. However, it might not even get to that point, since it is extremely likely that there is a run on banks as the situation becomes evident from the perspective of the population at large. And we all know what happens when a large enough part of the population decides to take out their savings at the same time. We're brutally reminded that our financial system is a magic trick, and those numbers we see on the screen of our bank accounts are just pixels, and in reality, there is more debt in the world than actual money supply. So inevitably, the bank will collapse. But what about the company employing robots? What will happen to them? Well, pretty much the same. The whole point of companies in a capitalist system is to create goods and services that consumers will buy. But in this world, there are no consumers. The capital of workers will run out eventually, and there will be no one left to sell to. The revenues will dry up as well, and with that, the final source of capital from the state will be snuffed out. Societal collapse is therefore inevitable. As the final dollar of a government budget gets spent, that will spell the end of capitalism and the birth of an alternative mode of life. Here are some final thoughts in no particular order. First, even the producers of the robots will inevitably collapse, as the companies they are selling those robots to will stop receiving revenue since there are no customers. Ironically, their inventions also cause their demise. Second, if we consider that certain robots have also been designed to substitute the professions that enable modern life through the sectors generally associated with the state, like the police, military, and other fundamental sectors like food production and power, it is possible that a new society might emerge and be able to organize themselves along the lines of simply acquiring the produce of those machines, without necessarily purchasing it. Third, this final point is however not likely because as soon as the state collapses, you know that humanity will break into tribes and fight to take control of the money supply, even destroying the robots if necessary. So my money is not on the happy future resolution. Thank you for watching Rebel Economics, and thank you for checking out this first What If video. I want to make this a series where we can explore some unlikely situations in economics. If you guys have any ideas about what we could do a what if video about, don't hesitate to write them in the comments. Besides that, I would recommend you check out our original video on why it is not likely that this will be your future and why robots will probably not take your job. If you like this content, consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.